So in this sub-lesson, we're going to be talking about AWS config and evaluate, assess, and audit your AWS resources against your own compliance requirements. And so it's one of the key services that allows you to perform compliance and automated compliance in your AWS account. And so if you look at this diagram, imagine you have a configuration change that occurs on your AWS resources. And AWS config natively supports right now 27 using AWS CloudTrail as well. But so config, and it does this, it stores it in a configuration item. And a configuration item is a JSON object. And it stores this as a configuration snapshot in S3. And so it keeps this record and also the relationships between other AWS resources as well, but it keeps a history of these changes. And so you can then compare your compliance requirements, your desired configuration against the configuration that it's recorded. And then what you can do is set up what are known as config rules. And so with config rules, you can define the rule that you want your resources to follow. And if they violate that rule, if it's determined as non-compliant, then it flags that, and then you can get notified through different means. And then based on this notification, prevent problems from occurring in the first place. In this case, we're talking about detective controls with AWS config and config rules. So it detects it after the infrastructure has been provisioned. And then later on, we'll talk about how we can then fix this as well. But so config and config rules being one of the key services that helps you identify when something is deemed as non-compliant. So it's really easy to set up and configure AWS config. We'll go over that. Essentially, you just turn the recording on. You can identify which resources you want to record the changes for. And then, so you can also indicate how you want the configuration change, how do you want to be notified about those configuration changes. And to questions about changes. What changed? When did it change? Which other resources were associated with that change? The example I talk about here is, who made the change, what IP address it originated from, and then the effect on related resources. And then you can look at history of that. That's one of the key aspects of this particular service, is you can look at the history over a period of time for those resources. And changes. And while it doesn't prevent the user from making the change, you can get pretty closely immediately or near immediately notified about that change, and then you can act upon that non-compliant resource. You can also run config across multiple AWS accounts. It's outside the scope of across your whole fleet of AWS accounts. This shows an example of AWS config rules and the relationship changes to it. So let's say you have a rule and you have associated Amazon resource for that rule, and then you can look at the compliance, and also you can look at the relationships for that particular resource or for those resources. And so if you go into AWS config, and we'll take a look at this as we go through the use of this service, but you'll see a configuration compliance timeline. You'll also see a configuration timeline. So you can see when it was out of compliance, when it went back into compliance, and so forth. And you can kind of occurred, what the other related resources that were changed in relation to that particular configuration change. And of course, you can get access to all this through the CLI, so you can use the config service option through the AWS CLI. And so if I go to, say, AWS config service, talking about in one of the future lessons as well. And so let's get in and configuring the settings for it.